This has been an amazing class, I think, not because of anything I've done, but I think I say that because of your participation and your commitment to be here on Sundays has been great. It's been an encouragement to me. Uh, I have really enjoyed the time that we have shared, even though it's been remote. You guys have been able to look at my back bookcase here in my living room every week.
Very
Uh,
nice.
Tried to have little surprises here and there, but the screen isn't close enough so you can see them. So that was kind of a fail. But I really appreciate how much you guys have been a part of this. I appreciate your texts, your emails, the visits that some of you and I have had about what we've talked about. I'm especially appreciative of being able to do this. I know that when we started, everything was just reducing down, gearing down, and I think, and I don't say this with any other comment than just for what it is. I think one of the last things we thought about when we started was having a class on Sunday mornings. We were just all so focused on getting inside, staying inside, and bare functions and simplicity. And so I'm really thankful that I was able to share this time with you guys over the last 3 months, this quarter. I'm really appreciative the work that Josh has done to set this up every week. He puts the stuff online. I don't know, they're probably the lowest watched videos on YouTube, but if you have watched or you have tried to go back, I hope that what you've seen has been useful. I hope it's been helpful, but I hope more than anything, my hope of all hopes is that something has come across your way that has helped you in your faith, that has strengthened your faith in God. This has been a very challenging time for this country. And when we started, this was sort of the beginning of it all. And we're not really at the end. This is one of those things that seems that with other states having a lot of challenges with their cases and things going on, that whatever the normal is, whatever it becomes, and I don't know that we're there yet. The one constant in all this that I've seen has been an amazing and powerful God that has shown his sovereignty over everything, has protected so many, and yet at the same time, tragically, so many have been sick and many have died. And so we've realized how much of a fallen world we live in, how imperfect this world is. And I hope that this study has given us all an ability to reflect and see, how wonderful a heavenly home is going to be. And so when I was thinking about how I wanted to wrap the class, I will tell you on the front end, had a very different place that I wanted to end up. There's obviously some more stories and more things throughout the Bible that we can talk about, and there was no shortage of material for a class such as this. But I will say that over the last many weeks, as I visit with some of you, personal experience, outside factors, that it's taken a little bit of a different course. But it's ended up, I think, in my opinion, that's free for what you get, is in the same place where I wanted it to be. And that is reflecting on what we've studied and what all this means, hopefully, as we not only finish this day in this class, but as we keep going forward. So with that, I am going to try my best to start this. And begin. So where we're at on this, as I call it, the final act. We have gone through a lot of things. We have studied a whole lot of material. We started in Luke, and we began at a place where we asked a lot of questions of ourselves, and we're getting a lot of questions in our own minds about what was going on around us and what community was and how hardwired we realized and understood us to be as Christians, as people, as just humans, that we are so incredibly wired for a community, some sort of community. And we've talked a lot about, what those things are. We've talked a lot about our identities as believers. We talked about some of what our titles and who we are and the things that we're a part of. And For us, at times it's been swimming pool where we're at with Kate's swim team, to Owen's baseball, to my work, to Kelly's work. We've talked about things that kind of become a challenge in our own minds and our hearts that have to do with idols and how those things take root and how they can twist and they can contort and they become what we struggle with. And there's no mistake that identity and idols have the same root word of id, the ego, the self, and who we are as Christians and how we are and how we're to approach and to encounter our faith and all these things and all these factors that influence us. We've talked a lot about sin. In fact, so many things, the backbone of all of what we've talked about has been about sin. Because sin is what creeps in, is what is lurking, what is always trying to find someone or something to corrupt. We've talked a lot about grace and hospitality and generosity in our relationships, generosity in our homes, which is slowly starting to become something that we can think about again. But in relationships, about starting at a place of forgiveness. In hospitality, we learned some really great words about lovers of strange things and the words that Jesus used about that. We talked about, and it's not an entirety of this list, but we also talked about the importance of commitment and how useless the words that Jesus Christ himself used, that you or I am, if we're not fully committed to him, to his promises and to his teachings. That if we put our hands on the plow and turn around and look behind us, that we're useless. And so we talk about a lot of things, and we've gone over a whole lot of subject material and all the different components. And you would think in a class about community that I would talk more about a broader whole. But as we've learned, and I hope that this has become apparent to you, the whole is only a summation of parts. And so the parts are what make the whole, the character, the nature, the spirit of the entirety of a body, of an organization. It's where we work. It's who we're friends with. It's all that we are, is all these things that make up us as believers. And that's what makes our community of faith. And so as we look at what the final act is, it's the thirst for us. It's the thirst that Christ has for us. And I was in a lot of places and a lot of things in my mind the last several weeks about where I wanted to end up. And I came across something that really, really, really just smacked me around. And I loved it so much. And it's my favorite story in the entire New Testament. I have to be honest. It's a story about the woman at the well and the thirst that Christ has for you and for me. And this is how I wanted to wrap this up. This was a place that I wanted to be, and I didn't even know it. I can't tell you that the subject matter that we're going to cover is where I thought of in April or March or even a year ago when I wanted to start this class. Because I wanted to end in a place, I wanted the summation to be about, the joy and the amazingness that we have as believers. Not as we have as individuals with just one another, but the amazingness that we have with Christ and with God in that community. And I realized that as we started to talk about so many of these things and each other and really the study and all the other aspects of it, how was I going to do that? And I struggled with it. I'll be candid with you. But then when I saw this and really got into it, I thought, man, this is it. This is my favorite story for a lot of reasons. But I thought the way that this was framed, I thought it was really powerful and something that I wanted to finish with. We all know the story about the woman at the well, and sometimes we glaze over it. Sometimes we don't think too much about it, but there's some really powerful stuff. And one of the greatest things about the woman at the well in the story in John's account is how different it is. And John is my favorite gospel. You've probably heard me say that. And I don't know, that could be wrong. It can be inappropriate to have a favorite gospel. But it is, because John brings about so many things that are so different. It's an angle that is so much in contrast with the other three. And one of the things that I was looking at, early in the week, was how John, in 1 John, talks about, he just talks, it's such a wonderful book, all of his books are, but he talks about my little children, just the little ones that he adores, about testing the spirits. Because there's so many challenging things that we've talked about in all the elements of community. But he talks about some things in this story that are really powerful. And I wanted to go over them because they're just that critical. Now, as we wrap up kind of John chapter 3 and get into 4, he's going to a different place. And this sentence is just so predictive. It's the foreshadowing. It's the foretelling. It's just this amazing nature of Christ, of God. And all these things that we've talked about, the level by which Paul and Jesus have talked about things, the level and the depth that they go to really bring out the challenges in our hearts and our minds as believers. The sentence that goes on here in verse 4 is so powerful, and it's so simple. And it's one of those, probably, if you've got a bucket list, that's great. I've got a list, I think, that I'm going to start of things that I hope to try to go over and talk about in heaven one day, because the sentence is just so certain. He had to pass through Samaria. He had to? Why did he have to pass through Samaria? There's not really anything else before that. The Pharisees had heard that Jesus was making and baptizing more disciples than John, and all these other things. I mean, it's early on in the book. It's early on in the story. It's early on in his ministry. He had to pass through Samaria. So there was a purpose. There was a determination. And it shows us as the story unfolds, as it becomes, you see towards the end part of the why, probably just a small portion of it. You've heard me talk a lot about what's the why. Let's get to the why. Why did he have to go through Samaria? But we understand that there was a determination and there was a purpose in that verse. And we end chapter 3 about kind of all these things that he's not afraid or he's not concerned. And the Pharisees were becoming more problematic. They were becoming more challenged. I mean, the environment that Jesus was in he was disrupting. He was causing a lot of challenges. He was converting people. He was talking about grace. He was talking about hearts and minds and all these things. And the Pharisaical viewpoint couldn't be more antithetical. And he says, the Father loves the Son and has given all things into his hand. His power, he wasn't concerned. Yet he was going to an area, he was going to a place that Jews avoided. He was going to a place that they stayed away from. He was going somewhere that the Jews thought and believed and taught and said and evoked in every way possible that was worthless, that those people were worthless, that they were the lowest of the low, and they didn't deserve what Christ was about to do. And so he's going to show his own purpose and his foreknowledge of what he was going to do. And he was going to bring about how the Pharisees, how they had heard what he was doing and making more disciples, that their fear was starting to become palpable. Their concern, their everything about what this guy was doing was really becoming more of a central figure. And that's what we see. And so we see the power of the Pharisees and everything that they're doing. We know the whole story. And yet, as we start this beginning of this part of this study today, as we culminate, as we finish, as the final act, we start with the basis that Christ had to pass through Samaria. Jews avoided it in every way. They wouldn't even go around it. They often would avoid it. They would circumvent it. There's a place they didn't want to go to. Sometimes, you think about traffic. I don't even want to go through there. The traffic is so bad, it's going to take me longer to go around. Sometimes we have reasons for our travel, for our places. I don't even want to mess with it. If you're going to a mall, I got to find the exact entrance. I don't want to even mess with it. I want to go through all the crowds. The Jews avoided it at all costs. They wouldn't go down. They wouldn't go down there. It was the most worthless place to them. And so Christ, because he said he had to pass through Samaria, he shows us that he has a purpose filled with grace, because Jews avoided this area. And I want to pose this question to you now. I want you to think about this. How many times in the history of man have we seen places avoided on purpose? Have we seen people avoided on purpose? How many times have we witnessed or seen or read through history how people have been degraded, demeaned in so many different ways because of their race, their ethnicity, their gender, the color of their skin? We see all these things. And one of the beautiful things about the story about the woman at the well is she encompasses so many of these aspects. And what's even more powerful and more striking, again, one of the reasons why it's one of my most favorite stories, if not the most favorite story I have in the entire New Testament, is that Christ breaks through every single one of those and speaks directly to her. And that's the basis of this entire story, is a purpose filled with grace that he had to pass through Samaria. And so what did he know about her? He had to pass through. It's amazing because we're developing this story. What did he know about her? Well, he knows the same things about her that he knows about you and me. The visit wasn't random because he knows her. He knows her entire story. Before he ever gets there, he knows everything there is to know about her. And it makes me think back to the Old Testament. I knew you while you were in your mother's womb. And he talks to her. And he knows everything there is to know about her. We could stop there and talk about the omnipotence and the knowledge and the power of Christ, and that would fill up an entire class, heck, an entire semester. But this story, it shows it wasn't random. He had to go, and he knew these things about her. He had a purpose. For you've had 5 husbands, and the one that she was living now, she wasn't married to. He knew her entire story. He knew how messed up she was. He knew how problematic he was. He knew everything there was to know about her. And he knew that she was thirsty. But what does he do? We see at the beginning when he encounters her, he starts the whole thing, the whole transformative encounter. He starts by not only going through Samaria, not only going through it, he sends the apostles away. They go get food from unclean people, mind you. And he starts the encounter one-on-one, just with her. He knew her life was broken. He knew that it had been broken for some time. He knew, just like other Samaritans, that their entire lives they had heard how unworthy, how terrible, how half-bred, how all these things, that they weren't worth it, they were worth less, that they were terrible, they were scum, they were treated horrible. He knew all these things, and yet he had to go there. She was a woman. She was a Samaritan. She was living in adultery, and she was known for all the wrong reasons. That's what he knew, just like he knows about us. Jews have no dealings with Samaritans, she said. How is it you ask me for a drink? And here becomes the entire transformative nature of this story. The entire shattering of every norm, of every tradition, of everything. That Jesus, the Christ, the Son of God, the Savior to all men, says to her, give me a drink. He's asking someone who's unclean, who's broken, who's terrible, who's rotten, who's horrible, who's living in adultery, who he doesn't even have his own cup, his own pot, his own anything to pull the water out. He's asking her for a drink, to drink from her cup that's unclean. And he shows how graciously relational he is in this encounter. He just says, give me a drink. Someone who is taking his position, his stature, his everything, and reducing it down, and how graciously relational he is to the person who's in a totally different place. I don't think it's any mistake that the apostles went away. Can you imagine what the encounter would have been with 12 or 13 men talking to one woman about this? It probably would have been really hard to have this conversation that Jesus has with her. She already had shame. She was coming to the well at the middle of the day when no one else was there. So she didn't have to bear with the eyes and the judgment, even among her own people. Oh, there she is again. There she is again. And she didn't want to mess with it. And we learn later that she even talks about, how do I get this so I don't have to come here anymore? She hates it. But she's had such a hard life. And so the apostles go away, and it's just Jesus. And he doesn't give up, and he persists. He persists, and he breaks down these barriers. He breaks down her barriers to understanding about what he's got for her. And he talks about, and look at how Christ brings her around to the soul-quenching relief that she is seeking and that she has sought. Again, showing the amazing power, the incredible mind of God, that he had to go here. that he knew all these things about her. He knew her suffering. He knew her pain. And here he was, breaking every barrier down. And she says, I'm tired of coming here. Give me this water so I won't be thirsty, nor come all the way here to draw. She's still taking it somewhat literally. And he draws out of her the plight that she has. He knew. And as he's going through this, as we see in this part of this chapter, how is it that you ask me? And he tells her, and I left this part out. I meant to cover this just a moment ago. If you knew the gift of God and who it is who says to you, give me a drink, you would have asked him and he would have given you living water. You have nothing to drink. You have nothing to get the water. You know, what is this living water? Aren't you greater than our father Jacob? You gave us the well. And she's going back. Are you more important than these people that I've always heard that are important? Everyone who drinks of this water will thirst, but whoever drinks of the water that I will give him shall never thirst. But the water that I will give him will become in him a well of water springing up to eternal life. And that's where she says, give me this water so I won't be thirsty. And so I don't have to come here. I'm tired of this. And he was persistent and he was breaking it down and he was starting to come through tenderly, patiently. And he says to her, she says to him, I'm sorry, sir, give me this water so I won't be thirsty. And he draws it out of her. This relation, this grace, this persistence, which is love. And he says, go call your husband and come here. And she says, I have no husband. I'm still doing it. I'm still doing it, Jesus. And he affirms her admission and he tells her, basically, I know. And he continues to show her how superior he is, not in a domineering way, but in a way that's relational, that he is showing her just this amazing, gracious superiority. You've correctly said, I have no husband, for you have had 5, and the one whom you now have is not your husband. This you said truly. Can you imagine someone who's drinking a water with her, who asked her for a drink that she probably gave him? Someone who's talking and she knows he's a Jew and she knows he's different. And he's talking. And the empathy. Remember, we talked about graciousness when it comes to relationships, starting in a place of forgiveness. Did Jesus condemn her? No. He didn't say it was okay. He just said, you're right. You're living with someone who's not your husband. You've had 5. It's almost like through his words and through his encounter, through this graciousness, through this purpose, that he's telling her, I know you're struggling. I know. And she's saying to him, I'm still at it. I'm still at it. And she says to him, I perceive that you're a prophet. And now she realizes how different he is. Towards the end of the chapter, this is what Jesus tells her after the apostles are back. For such people, the Father seeks to be his worshipers. And that is a big part of our everything. That's a big part of this story. Her brokenness, her pain, her suffering. He seeks those to be his worshipers. Well, I asked the question at the start of the study that we've seen in times in history where people, because of their race, have been horribly maligned. We've seen people, because of their ethnicity, all but wiped off the face of the earth. We've seen people, because of their gender, denied all sorts of everything. But in some ways, in many ways, in a lot of ways, we've seen these things turn. We've seen these things change. And we see in this story, we see in this example how Christ, through his graciousness of his relation, through his superiority, and through everything that he's doing, break all those barriers down. And he is seeking her. He thirsts for her and her plight, her problem, her struggle, to give her living, soul-quenching water, to free her from those bondages of those sins, of the way that she's been treated, the way that she's been maligned. For such people, the Father seeks to be his worshipers. And she continues to go on. And she says, I know the Messiah is coming. And deep down, he found the spark. Deep down, he found the spark. He broke through all that pain, all her hurt, all her sin. And inside of her, he found that spark, and she found her belief that she acknowledged the Messiah. And she says, the Messiah, I know the Messiah is coming, he who is called Christ. And when that one comes, he will declare all things to us. And through her acknowledgement, he tells her the most amazing part of the entire story. I who speak to you am he. And here she was, someone who deep down, after all these things, after this person was so persistent, this guy, this Jew, who was asking her from a drink from her water, her cup, that was dirty, from a prostitute of all accounts or all probable causes, living with the man that wasn't her husband, been married 5 times before, who was a Samaritan, who was worthless, who was shameful, who was out of water, who was getting her water at a well during the day when no one else was there. And through that persistence and that thirst to break through, to talk to her, because he had to go to Samaria, and she acknowledges that there's a Messiah who's going to declare all things to us. That spark that had been almost extinguished, that had been pushed down because of all these things, the way that she'd been treated, the way that she'd been maligned. And he tells her, and how amazing would it be when you're talking to someone who says to you, I who speak to you am he. He didn't say, bow down, woman. He didn't say, bow down and worship. He didn't say, go and give me all your money. He graciously, humbly, lovingly said, I who speak to you am he. The Messiah that she was hoping for one day, that would save her, heal her, tell us all things, repair her, I am he. And he confirmed to her that she was never going to thirst again. He was talking about soul-quenching water because she was seeking so many things about her life. And it was a persistent brokenness that she had. Being married that many times, she was seeking some sort of acceptance or worth. And she was continually running into dead end after dead end after dead end. In the day and time, living with someone without being in marriage was adultery. She was subject to penalties of death. By stoning, of course. She was persistently seeking value and worth after being told for so long that she wasn't worth it. She was told she wasn't worth it by her own people. She didn't want to be at the well. She didn't want them to see her. She didn't want them to look at her. The Jews, the folks who knew, she knew that they were, important. They talked about how terrible they were, how worthless they were. They avoided the area. We won't even talk to you. You're terrible. And her thirst was for those things that just give her some position of value, of worth, of acceptance of something. And it was broken and it was on repeat. It was like a scratch on a record that just kept going around in a circle and a circle and a circle. And her thirst was for something that could never quench that desire. And what Jesus gave her, what he told her, what he showed her through his grace, through his persistence, through his foreknowledge, through his commitment, through before he ever got there, as John said, he had to go to Samaria. She was that important. That we don't necessarily have to thirst for God, because he thirsts for you and for me and is pursuing you every day. For these are the people that God seeks to be his worshipers. the story of the Samaritan woman is as powerful as it gets. It's as compelling as any story in the Bible. His pursuit of her was so important that John wrote it down that he had to go to Samaria. A place that was avoided, a place that was downtrodden, and he sought her out, and he broke every convention, pushed every button, overturned every table, both figuratively and, of course, literally, as we read. That we have to ask the question, and all the stuff that we studied, how God pursues you, how he pursues me. And the flames that could be extinguished or just barely lit in our hope based on our situation. We've talked about idols. We've talked about so many things, addiction to sin and how it twists our heart, how it hurts us, how it bends us, how it breaks us. I can identify with the woman at the well. Maybe you can too. Maybe you've persistently sought something that has just brought you nothing but heartache, soul ache, and just total, absolute destruction. That's what sin does, remember? It wraps into your heart. Paul talked about idolatry and Jesus talked about it. And again, I've said it so many times, if the 10 Commandments were sufficient, then we would have been fine. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. Because he knew our hearts would get so entangled. And throughout this pandemic and throughout this lockdown and shutdown and close down, and we've probably had to face demons and hearts and minds and thoughts that we've never had to face. Or that we could overcome it by other circumstances or situations. There's probably things that you've done or said that you're ashamed of. Jesus is at the well for you and wants to talk. You've probably had situations the last many weeks where you've had thoughts or feelings about people that you're ashamed to have, or the anger and all these things, and you've said things probably that you wished you hadn't, or you've thought about things that you wished you hadn't. And Jesus is thirsty for you too. We've all seen where people have said and done things to others, and the strife and the turmoil and the hate and the anger right now in this country in so many ways. And those people have a thirst. And God is seeking them too. The broken, the downtrodden, the despondent, the maligned, the hated, is who he seeks to be his worshipers. And just like Jesus had to go to Samaria, he ended up staying there 2 days with all those unclean people, with all those broken people, with all those terrible, rotten, no good Samaritans. She became one of his most important figures. She went and told all these people about what he had done. And they said, we believe not because of what you said, but because of what he said. She went from maligned to being there in the middle of the day, the hottest part of the day, to where no one would see her, to being a central figure in her, not only her redemption story, but the story of so many others. That she was the spark because Christ found her spark through his love and his power and his mercy and his goodness. And many believed while he was there. It could be a story about mission. It could be a story about so many things. But I think it's a story that's appropriate for now, and that is that God thirsts for you. He wants you to have the soul-quenching, life-giving water, that you're no longer thirsty for hate, for anger, for rage, for jealousy, for all sorts of things, for any sort of addiction to alcohol or drugs or anything. He wants you to have the soul-quenching love and power that only God can give. That we see in the woman at the well, that she had tried 5 times through marriage and who knows what else. It doesn't matter. And Jesus showed us at the end of that story that it doesn't matter, because his soul-quenching, life-giving water is for everyone. If you've experienced pain and hurt, it's for you. If you've been the one that has given hurt, if you've inflicted pain, it's for you. And when I saw this study and I went into it, I thought, I hope that this is the perfect end. I hope this is the great final act of this class. That all these things that we've talked about that are struggles for us as a group of believers, as a community, and all the struggles that we've had as individuals for the last many weeks, that you'll know that God in Christ thirsts for you and for me. It's not easy right now to not be angry about a lot of things, from the changes in school upcoming to whether or not people are doing the right thing on coronavirus, to our elected leaders doing the right thing on public policy, to people that we know at church saying the right things about certain circumstances, or whether or not someone's wearing a mask, or if they're too close, or all those things. The transforming nature of God's love will help you realize that your faith in God and that your love of Him is the most important thing that you've got every day to accomplish. And that it will transform you, renew you, and will be soul quenching for everything in your life. So in all these things that we've studied, I hope that this class has been a way for you to grow stronger in your faith. Perhaps it's been the start of you becoming stronger in your faith because you realize the things that have taken root in your own heart. But just like the woman at the well, those too can go away. And maybe you've been in a great place and these things have helped you in your study and your faith and helped you see things more. Then you can help someone at the well. And if you're somewhere in between, I hope that you'll remember the words of Christ at the end of this story, that you and those people are those who God seeks to be His worshipers. He seeks you and He wants you to worship Him. Why? Because He loves you so much. He wants you to be in heaven with Him one day. I hope this has been helpful. I hope you've enjoyed this class. I've enjoyed you being a part of it. I hope that as we get together here soon, we will be able to see each other. I think that you have seen some announcements soon about some of the picnics up at the building for the 4th of July. Shall you want to socially distance and see my ugly face? I hope that you will come and we can share some food and fellowship as we slowly get back to a normal. Here soon, there's church up at the building. So I better wrap by telling you all how much I love each and every one of you as my family at Falls Church. Thanks for being a part of this class. We'll see you soon.